So hello everyone. My name is Mohammed, and I will be your host today with my colleagues Arjun, Shravani, Pranav. Today, this is our agenda. We're going to start with a quick introduction to Queer in AI, and then talk about the Undergraduate Mentorship Initiative, which this session is the first session of this initiative. Then we're gonna quickly go over the demographic survey and discuss the session format and the code of conduct. Then we'll go ahead with the speaker introduction and the speaker presentation, and then afterwards we'll have a small Q&A session near the end. So Queer in AI, for those of you who don't know, the mission of this organization is to raise awareness of queer issues in AI and machine learning, foster a community of queer researchers, and celebrate the work of queer scientists. What do we do? Host workshops and socials at machine learning conferences, work on graduate program application fees and review programs, and make sure that we help conferences with their inclusiveness guidelines. If you're interested in getting involved, you can join the mailing list or Slack. Become an organizer. Visit our website on queerinai.org, and links will be sent to you in a follow-up email after this session. The Undergraduate Mentorship Initiative is this is a brand new initiative within Queer in AI, and the purpose of the initiative is to offer queer undergraduate students around the world with some help and support to pursue their careers in academia or industry in the machine learning area. And we more specifically, our objective is to organize monthly sessions to connect notable researchers in machine learning to undergraduate folks, where in this space there can be an exchange of ideas and advice and all sort of useful information. We also are we're very focused on reaching out to an international audience beyond just undergraduates in North America or in Western Europe. We want to reach out and build a larger, a more international community of queer undergraduate folks who are interested in machine learning. And we also want to provide mental health and financial support for undergraduates pursuing their careers in machine learning. The demographic survey. So this is an anonymous, comprehensive survey that helps Queer in AI as an organization to identify different queer communities, issues, and things that help us shape our future programs. So it's very, very helpful for us to know these kind of information and to guide us towards designing initiatives like the Undergraduate Mentorship Initiative. So it'd be great if you can take the survey if you already haven't. These are some notable statistics from the survey. There's, for example, there are 20% identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color. 50% are graduate students, so that the other 50% are probably either people doing industry in their careers, like whether industry or academia, or undergrads. So it'd be helpful also to know how many undergrads are partaking in these sessions. We also have 80% reported lack of community and lack of role models in the queer machine learning space. So this is one of the reasons why this initiative for us made a lot of sense, because we want to fight that. We want to make sure that queer folks, especially undergrads, have good role models, and they can connect with them and they can learn from them about their journeys in machine learning, and whether in academia or in the industry. These are other statistics also showing some how do different people, different communities within our larger community have rated their experiences at the conferences. So for example, we can see that most people are very comfortable around Queer in AI events, but this rating is different for general conferences. There are issues with non-cis folks they're having with gender forms and and so on. So these results are just to show you that the survey is really important, and it really helps us to learn about the community and be data driven and actually design useful programs for everyone. To take the survey, you just it's anonymous, and you just have to either go to the website, or you're going to get a follow-up email with a link to guide you to take the survey. The session format, so only the speaker's portion of this talk will be recorded, and the recording will not reveal identities of participants. Please set your Zoom name to the name that you used to register for this event, and all information will be deleted. Participant information will be deleted after the event. There will be closed captioning, and participants should be able to message the hosts, but not anyone else. And they can also unmute at any time, especially during the Q&A session. Feel free to add your pronouns if you're comfortable with that. That would be great. For the code of conduct, please no screenshots or recording to protect the privacy of the participants. Obviously, do not send offensive messages to the hosts or fellow participants. And to report any violations, please report them over this email, safe@queerinai.org. And there's a template on our website for these kind of reports. You can find the detailed code of conduct also on our website in this link. Now let me introduce the speaker, Sabrina Mielke. Hope I'm pronouncing this right. Sabrina is a PhD candidate at the Johns Hopkins University Center of Language and Speech Processing. She's also a part-time intern at Hugging Face. Works on open vocabulary language modeling, develops new models based on underlying discrete units, and applies them to the typologically different languages of the world. So I'm very excited to introduce Sabrina, and Sabrina, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Let me just share my, there we go. Hope that works. Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna give a little bit of a talk, like a little bit talking about my background, things that I found useful for getting into research, why I think it's an interesting thing to do, and maybe some interesting takeaways that might be useful. So just like the very brief biographical sketch, I'm now, as Arjun said, I'm a fourth-year PhD student. I am part-timing at Hugging Face. I just started that, which is very exciting. Trying to see how working at a startup is. And I'm generally interested in foreign languages, multilinguality, and formal systems. So it's like, well, NLP seems like a good match. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit my background. Slides advance. There we go. My background, my undergrad, how I got into research, quick intermission, my coming out, and then what I'm currently doing. We'll see how much time we'll have at the end. Might get to talk a little bit about that too. So really just starting from the scratch, I was born in Germany and went to school there, and thank God, because that means I got free education. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here. So I was born into a family of like basically people who had no high school degrees. Literally all the women in my family are nurses, up to like 2 degrees away. It's kind of interesting. So nurses are better than doctors in my opinion. And so during high school, it became relatively clear that I was going to be a giant nerd and do something weird. For one, I opted to not study English in high school because it was like, English, who needs that? Latin sounds so much more useful. Like, why would you do that? But that's what I did. And I'm willing to believe that it led me to NLP to some degree. And the other thing that was like pretty clear was that computers were pretty cool. I like coding and it was a lot of fun. So what was I going to do with that? Well, given that education is free in Germany and the government gives you interest-free student loans, I managed to go to university. What was I going to study? Unlike in the US, you really start with your major in Germany and you choose it and you don't take classes outside of it. And I was like, yeah, I could do computer science, but that sounds kind of boring. Like, who really wants to do this formal math stuff? I don't know. And so I started studying media computer science, which was like something that existed at this university all the way across the country in Dresden. You might not have heard of it. It's not a particularly fancy or well-known university. It was very solid, but I don't know how well-known outside of Germany it is really. So there I was, studying media computer science. And as you can maybe see from the handwriting on these slides, it turned out that the design and arts part was not exactly my forte. And instead, I found formal languages suddenly very interesting. So in like 2014, I started getting really into like automata. If you've taken like an automata theory class, you kind of have some sense of automata and grammars and strings and trees and transduction. And in 2014, this was kind of like where the cool things in NLP made use of. There was a lot of parsing happening. You had tree adjoining grammar, categorical grammars. You had machine translation models in particular, who were based on like tree transformations, like from Yamada Knight to Hyro, GHKM being like the workhorse that like the better systems at the time that were syntax-based were using. And I thought this was all really cool. And I was like, yes, this is perfect. I can do this formal stuff and apply it to NLP. And so during my master's then, which really is just more classwork where I was, not as research focused necessarily, I did some project work where I tried to apply this kind of stuff to NLP, and it was nice. It was a match made in heaven. I could satisfy all my interests. But if you know things about the field of NLP in the past 2 years, you know that 2014, 2015 was the time when everything changed. And in particular, like this was the paper that I first read that talked about neural networks and how things were radically different with them. And yeah, fast forward another year or two, and not much tree automata left. We're all using RNNs now, and I suppose these days we are all on transformers. So that was a bit sad, but anyway, I still was determined to do NLP. I thought it was cool. I still like languages. Maybe I could get those trees back in there somehow, I figured. And the thing that then really got me started into research was a magical internship that I got through vitamin B, of course, or at least that's my suspicion. Many things in academia, I think, if you know someone or if someone knows you, you have a chance or a much better chance of getting certain things, and it sucks. So that's why I think having these communities and reaching out to people that way is a much better way and something that's sorely necessary. But at the time in 2016, I was lucky that the person I was working with at my university happened to know someone in the US who was doing actually NLP, unlike the main conferences. And so that was really my first research experience and my first time in the US. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. Turns out I can't speak English after all. It might not be so bad to go abroad to study. I trained my first LSTM, trained my first neural nets. I decided that I didn't like it, but well, what was I going to do? And it turned out that for the purposes of my internship, where we were to improve our machine translation performance, it was really just like hacks and heuristics, looking things up in dictionary, splitting some strings and checking things work out somewhere. That really worked well. And it got us some good performance, made us win the task. And I remember I was kind of sad, like, oh, this is not very cool. This is not what all the cool people who write papers are doing. But my mentors were like, no, this is still useful. Don't worry, you will get something out of it. And 1 or 2 years later, I did actually get on a publication thanks to this work. But the more important thing that I got out of it was really the research experience that I still got at this place. Because it was a big lab of people who were all doing NLP, and this research thing was definitely something I hadn't experienced that much before, because the group in Germany was much smaller and they didn't really include undergrads as much in their research, unfortunately. But here, I got to do all these things. I talked about papers that we read in reading groups. I attended seminars where people come in, present their work, made lots of new friends, and made people and have so many research conversations over lunch in the hallway. I got to attend my first conference, which was magical. And so at that point, I was like, oh, I definitely want to do this thing. This is so much fun. So that's how it can go. I did indicate that I didn't sleep as much as maybe I should have. I'm not sure that's very advisable, but I took it as a sign that I was on the right track. And so what I think the important takeaway now from this is, especially in retrospect, is that this is really the first time I had contact with not just papers that I could read, because I've done that before, but with the research community, with other researchers who are also passionate about this idea of NLP and of machine learning. And that really changed things. So I'm going to come back to this later, but community really matters. To give you a sense also and highlight something that I should say now that I'm having this slide praising research and how great it is. This is a paragraph in my statement of purpose with which I applied to PhDs the year after, or really the winter after. And the thing I want to highlight is this. What I want to do is get lost and find new ways, because it really was a lot of getting lost. I started doing things that didn't really make much sense. And so then my mentors were like, that really doesn't make much sense. Let's try and do something else. Why don't you check this out? And then some things worked out, some didn't. And I think that's so much of research. So especially your first few projects, I think there's just a lot of finding out what different things are. Some things work out, some things don't. Some things are interesting, and some things turn out to be boring. And you don't know. You don't know ahead, but you are probably going to learn something one way or another. So that is a caveat. It is a bit of a gamble always, but I think a gamble that pays off one way or the other, just differently at different times. All right, so well, I decided I wanted to do a PhD in the US. How would I do that? I was still very much like a student at some small German school. I had no papers, which at the time wasn't quite the expectation for someone to have before getting into a PhD program. I know nowadays people often say that it is an expectation and think that it is an expectation. I will say it can be an expectation if you come from like a fancy US school where undergrads do write papers. But if you come from like a university like me, where that's very much not the case, nobody expects you to have a paper. And I know from our admissions that this is something people think about. So no papers, it's not a deal breaker. But it is a good idea to think about what you can do instead to try and get some attention from researchers and try and set up some good collaborations. And the thing that I mostly did was I wrote blog posts. Well, I didn't know how to write a paper and I wouldn't know how to submit things to a conference. I didn't have any original research really, but I could paraphrase other papers, summarize some things, and do very simple studies just for fun. The good thing about blog posts is if you have these blog posts, that is proof that you do understand to some degree what you're talking about. You didn't just somehow magically get through school assignments. No, you really do know what you're doing. You can paraphrase these things, you can explain them well, and you are probably not too terrified of the prospect of writing for an audience, because that's what a lot of research is about. It's not just doing the finding out what's happening, but also the communicating to people what you found. The other benefit, of course, of this was that I could very nicely build some online presence with this. I decided to get on the Cursed Bird app, and someone said this like a year or two ago, and I love this. I used to recommend people get on Twitter, but I think this is a better way to see it. If you get on Twitter, you're really sacrificing sanity for visibility. And there's some truth in there. I think you can probably have a more nuanced view on this, but I definitely did sacrifice a little bit of sanity, but I got my visibility, and it was quite magical to see when I applied to PhDs and visited campuses. Like there were like a few people who were like, "Oh yeah, I saw that post," and I was like, so that's definitely something you can do, and that has value. So okay, sure, write blog post. What am I going to do this about? I'm just going to really, since it's easiest for me to talk about what worked for me, and this may or may not work for you, but what I did was, for one, have a post about like what I did for school, for classwork, some small projects, just explaining them, making some nice figures, and writing it up in like a blog style way, something that's friendly to read. And then one thing I also did is try and do some very simple like surveys of papers. So I did like one thing where I was like, all right, which languages are papers evaluating on? Are they all just evaluating on English, or do other languages exist? So that got me a whole lot of attention. And the bonus was I got to see a lot of papers. So I think there's many of these things that are not something you would necessarily see in papers, but that is still something that many academics are interested in reading and aren't going to value And that's great for someone to do to really get into the field. So that would really be my conclusion for how to get this exposure and how to break into a field, especially if you are not yet in like a fancy grad school program. Do some interesting work, write about it, and then advertise it. And the last step is a little bit tricky. Like, you should not be messaging 100 people, like cold email them, please look at my blog post. That's probably not the way to do it. But likewise, we write things so that they are read. And if you think, for example, you've written a survey on a topic and you've like cited an author a few times and you think that their work is really interesting, hey, maybe they'd be interested to read it, you know? And use your social media and all these things. Just, it's hard to say like in a blanket statement what to do and what not to do, but I think you probably will have an idea of whether people would be annoyed or interested in what you're writing. Now, this is what I did at the time, but now 5 years later, there are really like, things have changed to some degree in that there's so much research being done in like an open source space today, like so many tools and libraries and research systems that people have built. You can find on GitHub, like you can look at the code and you can download them, play with them. Sometimes you might not even need a GPU. And if you do need a GPU, well, there's stuff like Google Colab, where you get some access to GPUs or even TPUs for free. So there are so many options to do this thing. And one thing I would like to highlight is basically like the place where I'm part-timing, Hugging Face, they became somewhat important and known in the community precisely through their open source work, through their just re-implementing what other people had already implemented, but doing it in a nicer and more community-friendly way. So I think this kind of work is definitely appreciated by the community and can get you very much access into academia. For example, the Transformers repository eventually got a best system paper award at a conference. All right, to kind of say, okay, and then what happened then? Well, I got into a PhD. I decided to move to the US. I thought this was going to be fun. And it was really fun. I had the luck of being mentored by some senior students who let me join their papers and taught me the ropes, taught me, you know, the ins and outs, the tricks, the things that people hide in papers and how to do them. So in my second year, I managed to have my first author papers, projects that really I was driving and doing most of the work for. Year three, of course, is very classic. If you ask PhD students, the third year slump is real. And year four is like a little bit weird thanks to pandemic, but we're getting there. The point is, in all of this, it's going to be, oh, I forgot about this, money. Yes, PhD students get paid so much money in computer science. It's great. That's, at least for me, since I didn't come from like a very rich background. It's a good salary, especially if you live in Baltimore. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not saying you should go to Baltimore, but consider it. Anyway, the point is, community is going to be really important throughout all your PhD life. And so building up community is something you can start early enough. And again, I think this is what really a lot of this academic network is about, is building this community, not just in sense of, ooh, networking, I need to manage my opportunities, but also just to find friends and find support, find people who can give you advice and let you know how things are going elsewhere. It's going to be really important. And I think there are easier ways now with like all these social media interactions and virtual conferences than might have been in the past. But it's still going to take some effort. I'm not going to deny that. So, okay, community. How do we get into community? What kind of communities and research are there that can bring you like from the out group to the in group, so to speak? One thing I'd like to kind of highlight is, if you are already doing some research, one way you can really get into like conferences and communities is through shared tasks organized by like special interest groups or SIGs, like SIGMorphon for morphology, phonology, SIGtype for typology. These are like two of the SIGs that I have been co-organizing. And so we have some shared tasks in there that are usually conceptually relatively simple. We release some simple baseline system that you can just tinker with and adapt and improve a little bit, submit it, and boom, there you go. You have a workshop paper, you can present it at the workshop and get connections to people. So this can be a great way to get into a community. And the other thing I suppose you have already found out through affinity groups like Queer and AI, which you are here, or Widening NLP, which I'm a co-chair of, that's why I'm putting it there. Those can also be a great way to get connected to community, connected to opportunities, to get some advice and really get this in that is hard to get if you are not already part of this lucky group of people who are at fancy schools. I will say both these organizations have Slacks, which are cool to join, so I encourage you to do that. And you'll find them both at the main conference also this week. So with that, in conclusion, I would say if you want to do research, and I think you should give it a try, the easiest way to do it is, sure, do well in classes, ask professors to do research with you, but that may or may not work out so well if you're not at an institution where that's common. Maybe it doesn't have as much research, or there's not really a professor in a field that you're interested in. You can also do things on your own, do work on your own, with everything being open source and there being so much teaching material, open access papers, and books available. You can learn a lot of things by yourself and do a lot of work by yourself, and then publicize it, perhaps reaching out to interested people. And finally, be gay and do crime. It's Pride Months, and research is just confusing about everything just as life. That's just how it is. But it's fun to figure out how things are going. So with that, that will be my biographical pitch, and I hope this is somewhat useful to some of you. And then to hopefully see you at this conference, next conferences, online. It's a growing field, and I think it's not just growing in size, but also growing in interconnectedness, and that's a very good thing. All right, how are we doing for time? Well, we still got some time left. That's great. Then I can also present a little bit of research. But maybe before, yeah, do any of you have questions? We could maybe, if you want something addressed now. And so the one that I want to share is this last one in this list of things that's about gender bias, because I think I like to use it in like teaching for some examples. And I think it's a nice NLP application. I will say this is not exactly my paper in the sense that I'm not first author. This is Ron Smigrod, who is at Cambridge, a junior student, and we had this collaboration. It was really fun. So cheers to collaborations. All right, so what is this paper about? One of the NLP tasks that are relatively easy to understand why they're interesting is co-reference resolution. So what this is saying is if you have a sentence like, even though the doctor reassured the nurse, she was worried, who does she refer to? Well, it could be the doctor, right? Or it could be the nurse. And so asking an NLP system to figure out what this pronoun in this case, or maybe other words refer to, is obviously useful for figuring out, in this case, who was worried. But it can also be hard. Like in this example, both are possible. So what do we think? It turns out if we use state-of-the-art systems on this, they prefer to say nurse. And the only reason they do is because of gender stereotypes, right? Doctors, female? No, nurses are female, which is, of course, well, that's annoying. And we've seen this also in word embeddings, which carry biases such that, you know, if we have a neural representation of a word like engineer, it might be closer to a representation for the word man than for the word women. So that's an annoyance. And since these systems are used in the real world, we see those as issues, right? I feel like many people have by now seen these classic examples when you go to Google Translate and you plug in like a sentence in Turkish or some other language that doesn't specify genders in specific constructions. You get an English translation that imputes some gender, like in this case saying, oh, you're talking about nurses? You probably mean women, which sucks. So where does this come from? Well, it's kind of obvious in the sense that since all this is trained on data, there are probably more male doctors in the data than female doctors. So, okay, our data is bad. What can we do about it? So this data is kind of replicated in models. If they have these things like, in this case, a language model that tells us which text is more likely, less likely, you'd see it as part of translation, you would see it on your mobile phone, predictions, and so on. So these are kind of fundamental. And we can show that they say the two highlighted sentences are better in the sense that they are less surprising than the other two. And so a very simple trick that Lou et al. Introduced, that Lou and al. Introduced in 2018 is counterfactual data augmentation, which is like, all right, assuming that we only have male and female, which guess what, it's NLP, so many people assume it. You can be happy if they leave you a footnote, which is annoying, but that's where we are. Assuming that there's only male and female, and that's good enough for us. Let's take training sentences like she is a nurse, and make sure for every sentence that contains a gendered pronoun, we also flip from she to he and vice versa. So if we have a sentence, she is a nurse, add a sentence, he is a nurse. And that's great. So now we have exactly as many sentences, he is a nurse as she is a nurse. And so now the models that we train on them will find all these sentences equally plausible. Yay, we did it, good job. We did it for English. So what if we do, oh yes, this is like a talk I gave, want to add some silly commentary also. CDA says trans rights. This was before I came out, but I love this meme, so I put it in here. Anyhow, let's say we want to do this in German. So in German, things are similar enough. You see here, Arzt is doctor, and Krankenpfleger would be nurse. But you see that many words are gendered in German, not just the pronouns. So you have the word doctor being gendered, you have the adjective good being gendered, and you even have this determiner being gendered. So that's a little bit annoying, but let's see what happens. We can again use this trick of just swapping the genders of things, right? Now we can't just swap the pronouns because these things are inflected for gender. So let's just change all the words genders, right? Let's just flip them all. So in this case, if we have a sentence like the male doctor sits on a chair, what this would do is say the female doctor sits on a female chair, because nouns have nouns have a gender in German, like in Spanish and many other languages. And so this doesn't really make sense, right? The chair is just always masculine. Like, this is not grammatical. So what went wrong here? What went wrong is that we changed all the words as opposed to just the words that are connected to this pronoun. And connected is what I mean in the sense of syntax. So there is some internal structure to language, we know this. Like verbs have participants. In this case, the verb sits has a doctor as a child, and that has like its determiner and an adjective as a child, assuming that's our annotation scheme. And on a chair is like a phrase that is also part of sits, but it's not really connected to the doctor. And so what we need to do is figure out, okay, this thing is the one that we want to change. Well, then only the things that really are connected to it should change. And so I'm not going to go into detail as for the machinery that we built for this. The point is that we can do this and using syntax figure out that only these words need to change, but not the chair. And so now re-inflecting them, we get this correct sentence that the female doctor sits on a male chair. And if we do this, okay, results are great. I figured that's not so much the interesting part. What I liked about this paper and the reason that I picked it to show is that, for one, things that are easy in English might be hard in other languages, and vice versa. Evaluating only on English sucks. Don't do it. Or if you do it, and I mean, sometimes you need to, just be aware and maybe tackle also, or think about the question, what might transfer to languages and what not. This is also a case where we didn't use any neural models. So the model we used very much was a very old school model, and it worked well enough. And it's always careful with your training data. So yeah, I think that's definitely time. I hope this was interesting.